In her book titled An Altar in the World, Episcopal priest and renowned preacher Barbara Brown Taylor wrote this, which I have always appreciated. She says, "I have shelves full of prayer books and so many books on prayer. I have file drawers full of notes from courses I have taken and taught on prayer. I have meditation benches I have used twice, prayer mantras I have intoned for as long as a week, notebooks with column after column of the names of people in need of prayer. I have invested a small fortune in icons, candles, monastic incense, coals, and incense burners. I am a failure at prayer. When people ask me about my prayer life, my mind starts scrambling for ways to hide my problem. I start talking about other things I do that I hope will make me sound like a godly person. I try to say admiring things about prayer so that there can be no doubt about how important I think prayer is. I ask the other person to tell me about her prayer life, hoping she will not notice that I have changed the subject. I would rather show someone my checkbook stubs than talk about my prayer life." Well, you can tell how long ago this book was written by that last reference, the reference to checkbook stubs. Barbara Brown Taylor speaks for me and maybe even for some of you. In my earlier life, in a very conservative setting, prayer came easily. There was a prescripted form and flow to it: thanks, praise of some kind, confession if necessary, and then petition or praying for myself or others. Over time, I've noticed that I have fewer and fewer words in prayer. At some point, I did a little experiment and I switched my praying, and I no longer prayed to God, but I prayed to Jesus. I was thinking that Jesus might be more receptive or at least more responsive. And eventually those words slowed down too. Do you ever find yourself wondering what prayer even is, or what it means, or what it does? Do you ever find yourself feeling like you too are a failure in or with prayer? We get caught up in thinking that there are right and wrong ways to do it, or at the least, that there are minimum requirements. What if prayer is more like an ocean than the reservoir we've been thinking it is? What if prayer is more than saying words and is just as much about what we do? Honestly, I think the Bible is a bit mixed on prayer. What's interesting is how few stories there are about Jesus and how or what exactly Jesus prayed. Our text this morning from Mark is one of the few that actually talks about Jesus praying. And even this text doesn't give us any details about content or even the how. All it says is that he got up very early before the sun even rose and went to where he could be alone in prayer. But what does that mean? Was he talking? Was he listening? Was he praying for the people that he healed the night before? Was he wrestling with God? Was he asking for guidance? All we really know is that Simon and the others tracked him down. They found him, and there went his prayer time. gone. There's also the more famous scene toward the end of most Gospels where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. He goes off by himself to pray while the disciples fall asleep. His prayer on that occasion was asking God to remove the cup of death from him. But then he says, "But I want your will and not my own will." In other texts we read that he went off by himself to pray, but again, with no details about what was it exactly that he was praying or how. And then we do have some very short prayers at the end of his life when he asked God to forgive those who were murdering him, and he committed his spirit into God's hands. You would think for something as important as prayer, there would be way more examples or specifics from Jesus. We have the prayer that we call the prayer of Jesus, which is fairly specific, but was pieced together from different things as well. There are a number of texts in the Bible that are written about prayer, like the ones that say, "Ask, and it will be given to you," or that say, "If you pray for something and believe it will happen, it will happen." That kind of thinking is so harmful. I remember as a child praying and praying and praying, not just daily, but multiple times a day, because I had been taught to, that my alcoholic mom would somehow be healed, and she was not. And I kept thinking, is it because I just don't believe, because that's what I was being taught, that it had to do with my belief, not anything about God? So it's harmful when we hear those words. I've known so many people over the years who have prayed and absolutely believed that the thing could happen, only to see it not happen, and then turn to self-blame around their own lack of faith. Now, don't get me wrong, I do think sometimes things that we call miracles happen and there is no explanation for them. And those things are extremely unusual. But thinking that God can grant us any wish we have if we just believe is not what I think prayer is primarily about. What if prayer is simple? What if it's about paying attention? For most of us, that would mean putting down whatever the thing is that constantly keeps us distracted. Think for a minute about how you walk from one place to another. We're usually so focused on where we're going that we don't pay attention along the way. Especially as people age, we tend to get focused on not stumbling or tripping or falling, and so we pay more attention to the ground in front of us in order to avoid tripping. But looking at the ground isn't necessarily paying attention either. Paying attention has to do with us opening our senses enough to be able to take in what and who is around us. How does the air feel on our skin? How does the ground feel under our feet? What are the smells around us? What do we see if we actually take time to look around, to notice what's on the sides of us, what's ahead of us, but also what is it that's behind us? What's in the human and non-human world as we walk? And of course, there's also the paying attention to what's going on inside of us. Are we seeing or hearing or feeling things that delight us or concern us, maybe even excite us? Do they anger us? Are they things that draw us in? If paying attention is prayer, then are spoken prayers different? Are you saying prayers? Are you praying when you pray for the list of people you care about who are in need of help? Are you saying prayers? Are you praying when you lift up your list of gratitudes? What's interesting about those questions is there are people who don't believe in any kind of higher power or divine being who pay attention, who feel gratitude, who send energy to people they love who are in need. So what is it that makes it prayer? Are these people praying if they don't believe in a higher power or a divine being? Brother David Steindl-Rast wrote a book titled Gratefulness, the Heart of Prayer. And the words he used to describe this idea of paying attention were, wake up. While paying attention or waking up seems to be part of praying, maybe it's a part of the ocean rather than the whole thing. Over the years, so many monks and brothers and nuns and hermits and mystics have taught us that everything we do in a given day is prayer. While we tend to isolate prayer and think of it as this time we spend or what comes out of our mouths or our minds if we're praying silently, we have so many examples of prayer as what we do with our hands and our feet and our time. Caring for the sick is prayer. Marching for freedom is prayer. Working to end mass incarceration is prayer. Making soup for someone in the congregation is prayer. In a monastery or a convent, those who live in community believe that washing dishes or hanging the laundry is prayer. The idea behind this is that prayer is primarily relationship with God. And in everything we do, we are in this relationship. So it matters how we're doing it. If we're angry about having to do the dishes, which is completely legitimate sometimes, that has an impact on our relationship with God. If we're trying to make ourselves look good by marching in the streets, that has an impact on our relationship with God. This idea that everything we do, literally every breath we inhale and exhale, is part of prayer, sounds simple, but it's actually not. If you're anything like me, as soon as you're up and headed into the day, you forget the prayer part of it and may not even remember until the end of the day, if at all. You are, in essence, going through your to-do list. Made the bed, fed the cats, put the laundry in, went to work, stopped at the grocery store, made dinner, cleaned up, paid bills, went to sleep, rinse and repeat. Now, there might be a moment or two in there where you actually pray like, God, help me find a parking space near the door when you're at the grocery store. Or maybe in the middle of your workday, you think about a friend of yours who is struggling and you say a quick prayer for them. Most of us, though, are not in the habit of living as though everything we do is prayer. And we simply aren't that attuned. But what if we were? What if we could develop the habit of paying attention completely differently to all that we say and do, including how we spend our free time? How would we feel about prayer if we began to think of it as all that we're doing. Another way to think about prayer is to figure out what moves you. What moves you to tears, to anger, to laughter, to joy, to sadness, to contentment. In other words, what is it that helps you to feel? I came up with a list that is quite incomplete, so add to this list in your heads. Music, babies, art, theater, watching kids play with complete strangers, figuring out how to include everybody and be kind, nature, animal videos, especially when one animal takes another animal under their wing, so to speak. Championships, underdogs coming from behind, surgeries or medical interventions that save lives, books that we read, travel, accomplishing something difficult, deep sharing. There are so many things that move us, and it's different for each of us. One of the things that grounds me is being in nature, and when I'm lucky, taking pictures of animals. It also moves me. I've realized lately that it's a form of prayer for me because in those moments I am paying attention. I feel connected to all that is around me and in me. I feel gratitude. There are times when I feel something similar in my organizing work. Though I might also feel anger or outrage or frustration, I'm also paying attention in those moments. I feel things. I feel connected to all the people around me who are working for the same outcome. And I feel gratitude for the community gathered. Isn't it weird that two such different activities that I do with my body and my hands and my feet can be forms of praying? But we still have to deal with the words of prayer because that's where most of us feel inadequate. Just ask anyone to pray out loud, and most people instantly break out in a little sweat and feel uncomfortable and inadequate. That comes from years of thinking that praying is about the words we utter rather than the lives we live. We've been conditioned by trained clergy and others that words are everything in prayer. I'm often in spaces where I am one of a few and sometimes even the only white clergy person. If you have ever heard black preachers and prophets pray, you know that it is an entire spiritual experience by itself. I have heard prayers that have been better sermons than I will ever preach in my life. And I pay attention to words, and there are times when I also feel completely out of place because the words I hear are not the words of my particular faith experience. Sometimes I find myself wondering if I have any faith left at all, especially after I hear a prayer that calls for something so out of reach, it would clearly have to be a miracle. I've decided that I do have faith left after all these years. Two recent experiences helped me realize how to put it in words. In November, we did a Future Search weekend, which was with our own congregation and some of our external partners. And during the conversations that come up, I was asked a question. Mike Victor, one of our friends and external partners, said He wanted the clergy in the room to answer the question about whether Jesus is coming back again. Just a little small question on the side there. I was one of 2 clergy people in the room, so I was expected to answer. So I responded by saying that I am a heretic in regard to the second coming of Jesus. I explained that I believe Jesus is incarnate in each one of us, and in that way has already come back. We are all the second coming of Jesus, and it's up to us to work for the healing of the world. Rather than praying for some future rescue out of here, we can be working for healing every day. The other experience happened just last night. Jeanette and I were invited to a baby shower for Reverend Sierra Bates Chamberlain, who many of you know because she has preached here. We were sitting at a table with 2 black women, one of whom is also a pastor, and I overheard them talking about prayer. I missed the first part of it, so I'm not sure how it came up, but I did hear part of what they said. And one of the women said, "That's the thing about prayer. You can't just sit back on your couch and pray and expect something's going to happen. Every time I pray, I'm given a plan. That's what God does. We pray, and he gives us a plan, and it's up to us to put the plan into practice. That's how it works. Prayer, plan. That's why you have to listen." I loved what she had to say, and of course, I knew I was preaching on prayer today, so I was paying particular attention. And I would add, maybe, that we're all going to reach a point in life someday when praying from the couch is the best we can do because of age or health or something else. And that will be enough. But she gave what I thought was a profound and simple explanation of how prayer works. Prayer, plan. Well, here's where I am these days with prayer. So much of what impacts our prayer and ideas of prayer has to do with our own images of God and how we think God is involved or not in the world. I do pray. I want you to know that. I do pray. I pray for you when you've shared with me that you or someone you love is struggling. I pray for us as a congregation that we will live into our purpose for this time in history. I pray for our city and our country that we can end supremacies and live into a love and justice ethic. I pray prayers of gratitude a lot. I also pray for guidance and wisdom and discernment about all kinds of things, including how to parent adult kids. Sometimes my worry and anxiety is what I pray, especially related to my kids. Sometimes even your kids. The content of my prayer, however, is often for nudging. I pray that God would nudge this person or that. And if I'm honest, sometimes I pray that God would give a hard elbow into someone instead of a gentle nudge. When I pray, I know that God might not do the nudging that I want, and sometimes I'm probably glad for that too. But I also know that whomever is receiving the nudge might not be paying attention, either accidentally or on purpose. So part of my prayer, going back to earlier, is that I will be a person who is paying attention, because who knows how God is nudging or elbowing me. I get asked to do a lot of things. Before I say yes or no, I try to listen for the nudge or the elbow. When Lucretia Burtz, who was working for Community Renewal Society as an organizer for police accountability, asked me to apply to be on the Community Commission for Public Safety and Accountability, I had to listen first. Before I say yes or no to something or someone, I listen for several things. Am I doing this to make myself look good? Am I saying no because I'm tired in this moment? Does this feel risky? In what ways? How does this align with my values and my call? If I say yes, what will I have to say no to? Believe it or not, I do say no to some things. But there are some things that I also say yes to, even when I may not feel like it, because I sense the nudging of God. My prayer is much more informal and conversation-like than many pastors I know, because my theology, my own ideas about God, are much less defined than some. When it feels like the world is burning up around us, I sometimes wish I could be far more certain in prayer, or more powerful in prayer, or something. Instead, I go for a walk and I pay attention. And I listen, as the woman said last night, for whether or not I'm being given a plan. If prayer is an ocean, most of which I will never see or experience or even understand in my lifetime, what and who and where am I or you in it? Barbara Brown Taylor talks about teaching world religions and the field trips she would take her students on to the various places of worship, including the Vedanta Center, the Greek Orthodox Cathedral, the Reformed Synagogue, and the Muslim Masjid. She talks about all of the prayers they participated in and her experience with them. In the end, she says this: all of these visits have aided my sense that there are real things I can do, both in my body and in my mind, to put myself in the presence of God. God is not obliged to show up, but if God does, then I will be ready. At the same time, I am aware that prayer is more than something I do. The longer I practice prayer, the more I think it is something that is always happening, like a radio wave that carries music through the air, whether I tune in or not. This is hard to talk about, which is why prayer is a practice and not a discussion topic. The best I can do is tell you how it works for me. Her words are so wise. May we always be listening for the music of the Spirit. Amen.